Philippians 4:4-8. Paul shows how to live a thankful life. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to everyone. The Lord is near. Do not worry about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, beloved, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things.
Pleasing. Think about these things. Well, let's look a little bit at this particular letter that Paul wrote and others that he wrote. There are several books in the New Testament which are called epistles, which means letters, that are attributed to Paul. There is some discussion about which ones were actually written by him and which were written by his proteges or his students. But in any case, these are the ones that are most familiar to us, the ones that were written to groups of people. Then there are 4 that are called pastoral letters that were written to specific people. But Romans, Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, Thessalonians, and Hebrews. These are the ones that were aimed at groups of people that had specific issues going on. We know that Philippi is a city in the top of the Aegean Sea. It's in Greece, on that ridge of land that runs between Turkey and Greece. It was a big city. It was a cosmopolitan city, and it was a city that was on a trade route. It's called Philippi because Philip, who was the father of Alexander the Great, named it after himself, Philippi. It's also famous because there was a battle there that wound up killing the 2 men who killed Julius Caesar. So Philippi has some historical value to us. Paul traveled to many of the cities in this kind of end of the Mediterranean, and as well as to Rome. So we know that this is where those letters were aimed, at this part of the Mediterranean. Philippi was indeed a big city. This is an aerial picture of the remains of Philippi today. There's a theater, which is a big amphitheater. There is an atrium. There is an agora, a marketplace. There are several temples. There's a forum. It was an elaborate Roman city. And it was very often that Paul went to these cities and looked for a Jewish community to do his preaching and teaching. And when he came to Philippi, he wound up connecting with, first of all, some women, one of whom we remember is Lydia. Anybody know about Lydia? Seller of purple cloth. Okay, big deal. Who wore purple cloth? The royalty. So Lydia had a very prestigious job there, and she was one of the leaders of the church at Philippi. There are other people connected with the church, and Paul developed a great friendship with this group of people. And in fact, he begins in the first chapter, verse 3, by saying, "I thank my God every time I remember." What a beautiful thing to say. Now, we know that with the Corinthians, he wasn't quite so enamored because they were difficult folks. They had lots of issues. But from the way Paul wrote to the people at Philippi, we understand that this was a group that he really had connected with. When Paul was in prison, the church, the people in Philippi, sent Epaphroditus to him. That's a long name, and you didn't have to read it. With a gift and a letter of support when he was in prison. So Paul had made this very strong connection, and when Epaphroditus got very ill while he was visiting Paul, and when he finally recovered, Paul sent him back to Philippi with this epistle. And it's a short one. It's only about 4 pages. It's 4 chapters. And chapter 4, which we're looking at today, is the end of this letter. It's kind of the sign-off part. And he begins the 4th chapter by pointing out an issue that's been going on between 2 women in the congregation, Euodia and Syntyche. Again, did not want you to have to read that. They evidently had some issue. We don't know what it was. It probably was nothing significant, but the community was impacted by some internal squabble. And Paul encouraged the community to come together and support both of these women and help them move forward. And the way he does that is by suggesting, rejoice in the Lord always. Now, this is not some, just be happy. It's not like that. What Paul is saying is acknowledge the issues you have. Deal with the issues that you have. And it's by rejoicing that you will remember that God is present with you in that very place, even when it's difficult. So be clear that this isn't a Pollyanna kind of, just everybody be happy and everything will be fine. Paul is saying at the heart of this rejoicing in the Lord is a deep understanding and a faith that there is a future. And it doesn't just come, that we have to work for it. We have to work toward it. Well, as I was thinking about this, I remembered my mom. Because she was a woman who always had that forward-looking kind of, okay, we got a problem, let's deal with it, and then we can move forward. And the story I want to share with you today was when she was, she was in her mid-60s. She was diagnosed with leukemia, CML leukemia, chronic leukemia. And the doctor said the average lifespan, once you're diagnosed, is about 48 months. Of course, they didn't tell us this, but the first thing she said to the doctor was, okay, what do we do? This was so my mother. All right, I have leukemia. I can deal with that. How do we do the next thing? And she outlived the diagnosis by a whole year. She lived 5 years beyond her diagnosis. And she never gave up that forward thinking. Never boo-hooed about, oh, poor me, I'm sick. She just kept going. And at her memorial service, the minister's sermon title was, Why Not? And he said, Connie Frueh was the one woman in this congregation, when everybody else was saying, why should we do that? Connie said, why not? Let's try. And so that spirit of rejoicing always, she also always told us, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all. But and she meant it. But that sense that the rejoicing at the heart of that, being able to rejoice, was an understanding that God is present with us. And as we move into whatever's out there, God will be there with us. So I want on this Mother's Day to remember my mother, who gave me that gift of rejoicing. And why not? Why not? Paul ends this letter by giving a list of things that can help us learn to rejoice. When we get stuck, when we're down in the dumps, all we can think about is how bad everything is. And Paul says, think about what's true or noble, or right, pure, lovely, admirable. These are the things that will help you to rejoice and move forward. He doesn't say, ignore your problems. Be clear about that. And in fact, in other letters, he says, if you have a problem with somebody, you go talk to them. And if there's a problem, then the community will deal with it. But it's up to you, when you have an issue with somebody, to deal with it. Don't walk away. So, on this Mother's Day, what better gift to think about than this great concept of rejoicing, of at the core of your being, knowing that God is with you and that God will be there for you, so that you can rejoice always.